It was the third week of August, 1988. One of those Oregon summers that smelled of Douglas fir and warm basalt, and the particular dryness that comes when the Coast Range has pulled the last of the rain west and left the inland valleys in a long, golden quiet. The 12 members of the Corvallis Community Church Youth Group had been planning this trip for 2 months. They had held 2 car washes and a bake sale to cover the permit fees and the food costs, had borrowed the church's 15-passenger van and a borrowed tent trailer from one of the families, and had packed and repacked their gear over the preceding week with the focused excitement of people who have been looking forward to something long enough that the anticipation itself has become its own reward. They were going to the Cascade foothills east of Corvallis, to a drainage area below Mary's Peak that the trip organizer, 26-year-old David Drasher, had scouted on a solo hike the previous spring and declared perfect, creek access, old-growth Douglas fir canopy, a meadow that caught the last of the evening light. 3 days, 2 nights. Home Sunday evening in time for dinner. They left the church parking lot at 6:45 on Friday morning, August 19, 1988, in 2 vehicles. David Drasher driving. 14-year-old Amy Drasher, his younger sister, the youngest person on the trip, riding in the front passenger seat with her nature journal open on her knee, already pressing a sprig of fennel she had picked from the church garden into the first page. Tom and Patrice Holt in the second vehicle, adult chaperones, married 7 years, with a bottle of sparkling cider in the cooler in their trunk that they were planning to open Monday evening to celebrate their anniversary. The parents of the remaining 9 campers waved from the parking lot as the vehicles pulled away. No one who was in that parking lot on Friday morning would see any of those 12 people again. And the question of what happened to them, a question that would consume Benton County, the state of Oregon, and the families involved for 34 years, would not be answered until a geological survey team descended into an unmapped cave system in the Cascade foothills in the spring of 2022, and found, in a chamber 200 feet below the surface, the answer that the mountain had been keeping since August 1988. But to understand what that answer meant, and what it cost, and what it finally gave back to the people who had been waiting for it, you have to go back to that Friday morning. Because to understand what was lost, you first have to understand who those 12 people were. Corvallis in 1988 was a university town of 40,000, home to Oregon State, surrounded by the Willamette Valley's farmland and backed to the east by the forested foothills of the Cascades. It was the kind of place where community institutions, churches, schools, the co-op grocery, the Saturday market, were threaded through ordinary life in a way that made the town feel smaller than it was, where the families of the Corvallis Community Church Youth Group had known each other for years, and where a camping trip organized by a young youth pastor was the kind of event that got written on refrigerator calendars and talked about over dinner for weeks beforehand. David Drasher was 26 years old, recently graduated from Corvallis Community College and Western Seminary's extension program, in his first year as youth director at the church. He was the kind of young man who remembered birthdays and knew the names of the younger kids' pets and showed up early to set up chairs before any event. He had one specific habit that everyone who knew him knew. He sent postcards. From every trip he took, every conference, every visit out of town, he wrote a postcard to his grandmother, Vera Drasher, who lived in a retirement community in Eugene and who saved every one. Before he left for the camping trip, he had written the postcard in advance, heading into the hills. "Grandma, back Sunday. Save me some of your shortbread," and stamped it and left it on the kitchen counter to mail when he returned. Amy Drasher, his sister, was 14. She was the youngest person on the trip, included at their mother's insistence that David keep an eye on her and David's insistence that Amy could handle herself, both of which were true in equal measure. She was a careful, observant girl who had been keeping a nature journal since she was 10. Pressed flowers, pencil sketches of birds, careful notes on what she had seen and where. She had packed the journal in her day pack alongside 3 extra pencils and a small wildflower identification guide she had checked out from the Corvallis Public Library. She intended to return it the following week. Tom and Patrice Holt had been volunteering with the church youth group for 3 years. Tom taught biology at Corvallis High School and had a particular gift for explaining the natural world to teenagers in a way that made them feel more curious rather than less. Patrice was a pediatric nurse at Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center, quiet and steady in the way that people who work with sick children learn to be quiet and steady. They had been married since 1981 and had no children yet, a situation they had made their peace with in the way that some couples do, by turning their attention fully outward. The sparkling cider in their cooler was a Martinelli's in a gold foil bottle. Their anniversary was August 22nd. They planned to be home by then. The remaining 8 campers ranged in age from 15 to 19. Their names were Kevin Adler, Sarah Baumgardner, Wes Colton, Nadia Ferris, Jason Holbrook, Caitlin Marsh, Ryan Pritchett, and Tamara Wills. They were students, a part-time grocery store clerk, a future nursing student, a boy who wanted to study forestry. They were someone's child, someone's older sibling, someone's best friend. They were, on the morning of August 19, 1988, looking out the windows of a church van at the foothills, turning gold in the early light, talking over each other, completely alive. In 2 days, none of them would be coming home. Janet Okafor was 17 years old on the morning the vans left. She had been on the trip list from the beginning, had helped organize one of the car washes, had packed her gear twice, and had come down with a flu the Wednesday before departure that her mother decided, firmly, was not going to get better in time. Janet had cried. Her 15-year-old brother Paul had stayed home with her, because their mother did not want Janet to be home alone, and because Paul, though he had been less enthusiastic about the trip than Janet, had decided that staying home with his sister was better than going without her. By Sunday evening, August 21st, when neither vehicle had returned and David Dracier had not called the church as planned, Janet and Paul were the ones who started making calls. They called the church secretary. They called the Holt's home number. They called David's mother. By 10 p.m., Benton County Sheriff's deputies had been notified. By Monday morning, August 22nd, a search operation had been authorized for the drainage area below Mary's Peak. The search ran for 11 days. Searchers found the campsite on the second day, 2 tents, the borrowed tent trailer, a fire ring with ash still in it, cooking equipment, personal gear arranged as if people had stepped away and expected to return. David Dracier's truck was parked at the trailhead. The church van was there beside it. Both vehicles were locked. The keys to both were found inside the tent trailer, hanging from a hook on the trailer's interior wall. They had gone somewhere on foot, without their vehicles, without most of their gear, and they had not come back. The search expanded across a 4-mile radius and then an 8-mile radius. It covered every accessible trail, every creek drainage, every ridgeline within reach of the campsite. Deputies, volunteers, 2 search and rescue dog teams, and an Oregon National Guard helicopter ran concurrent operations for more than a week. They found a single item beyond the campsite: Amy Drescher's wildflower identification guide, sitting on a flat rock beside the creek approximately a quarter-mile northeast of camp, as though she had set it down to look at something and intended to come back for it. The guide was collected and placed into evidence. It had a Corvallis Public Library barcode on the spine. It was overdue. The geological survey maps for the drainage area had been updated in 1986, following a federal assessment of Cascade Foothills subsurface geology. The 1986 survey had flagged a 3-square-mile zone in the drainage as containing potential subsurface voids, unmapped lava tube formations consistent with the region's volcanic geology. That flag had been entered into the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries database. It had also been transmitted to the U.S. Forest Service District Office, whose jurisdiction included the area. David Drescher had applied for a camping permit for the drainage through that same district office in June of 1988. The permit had been issued. The geological flag was in a separate database from the permit system. No cross-reference had been performed. No warning had been included with the permit. That detail, the flag in one database, the permit issued from another, the two systems never speaking to each other, was documented in a Benton County Sheriff's investigative report filed in October of 1988. And then, for reasons that cannot be fully explained, never acted upon with the urgency it deserved. The case was classified as an open missing persons investigation. All 12 names remained in the system. Nobody closed the file. Detective Sergeant Carl Myers of the Benton County Sheriff's Office had led the 1988 search. He was 43 at the time, a methodical man who had worked Pacific Northwest search and rescue cases for 18 years, and he had never encountered anything like this. 12 people, no remains, no trail beyond the campsite, and one borrowed library book. He had pushed for a more thorough geological assessment of the drainage area in 1989 and had been told that the terrain made subsurface access both impractical and prohibitively expensive for a missing persons investigation, with no confirmed evidence of underground presence. He had never been fully satisfied with that answer. He kept a copy of the case file in his home study until he retired in 2004. He kept it after that, too. The families had formed what they called, informally, the August Group. The parents and siblings of the 12, who met on the anniversary of the departure every year, and who had collectively, over time, become a kind of extended family bound by the specific bond of people who share an unresolved thing. They had hired a private search team in 1993 that spent 3 weeks in the drainage and found nothing new. They had petitioned Benton County twice for fresh geological assessment and been denied both times on the grounds of cost. By 2001, 13 years after the disappearance, Patrice Holt's mother, Margaret Holt, who had attended every August group meeting since 1989, had gone into the early stages of dementia. By the time she died in 2009, she no longer remembered clearly why August made her feel the way it did. She knew something had happened to Patrice. She knew August was the month. The specific shape of the knowing had worn smooth. By 2010, 22 years had passed. Amy Drescher's library book, still logged as overdue in the Corvallis Public Library's records, had been quietly removed from the circulation database in 2003 by a librarian who had looked at the return date and the name and understood. The library kept the record internally. Nobody charged the fine. Janet Okafor was 41 years old. She had kept her August 19th ritual since 1990, a candle. The church parking lot, the spot where the vans had been. She had not been asked to do it. She had simply begun doing it the second year after they were gone, and had not stopped. Some years, she came alone. Some years, Paul came with her. Some years, other members of the August group joined her. She never announced it in advance. She simply went. Then, in the summer of 2019, a hiker named Jeff Strand was scrambling off trail in the drainage below Maris Peak when he noticed, at the base of a decomposed Douglas fir that had clearly fallen decades earlier, A gap in the ground approximately 3 feet wide and 2 feet tall, partially obscured by regrowth but open. He photographed it. He reported it to the Sislaw National Forest Office. The report was logged, forwarded to the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, and assigned for assessment, which, given departmental resources, was scheduled for the 2022 field season. The case had been cold for 33 years when a dead tree finally finished rotting and let the light in. Every story told here begins with weeks of research, tracing records, and working to make sure the people involved are treated with the respect their stories deserve. If you believe that work matters, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop us a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Now let's get back to Corvallis. Dr. Marcus Webb was 41 years old in the spring of 2022. A geologist with the USG's Pacific Northwest Field Office in Portland, who had grown up in Corvallis and who had been assigned to lead the assessment survey of the reported void in the Marys Peak drainage. He had been 11 years old in August of 1988. He remembered the disappearance the way people who grow up in small cities remember the things that defined the place where they were children, not clearly in all details, but in weight and color. He knew what had happened. He knew the names. His older sister, Renata, had been on the original trip invitation list. She had broken her ankle at a track meet 3 weeks before departure and had not gone. Marcus had found her original permission slip, signed, dated June 1988, never submitted, because she had broken the ankle before it was due. While packing boxes during a house move in 2019, the same summer Jeff Strand found the opening in the ground. He had held it for a long time. Then, he had packed it carefully into a box marked Keep and carried it to the new house. He descended into the cave on April 14, 2022, with a 4-person survey team through the opening Strand had reported. The cave was a lava tube system, a geological formation created when the outer shell of a flowing lava stream solidifies while the molten interior drains away, leaving a hollow tube in the rock. The system ran northeast beneath the drainage, deeper and more extensive than the 1986 survey had estimated. The entrance chamber was low and required crawling. 40 feet in, it opened into a passage tall enough to stand in. The temperature inside was 51 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity was stable and low. These conditions, consistent temperature, low moisture, are why certain materials survive inside lava tube systems for decades without significant degradation. Webb's team moved carefully, documenting as they went. At approximately 200 feet from the entrance, the main passage opened into a secondary chamber on the right side. A wider space, roughly oval, with a flat floor. Webb's headlamp swept the chamber and stopped. The chamber was not empty. There were sleeping bags, folded, stacked against one wall as if someone had organized them. There were backpacks, a camp stove, its fuel canister still attached, a first aid kit, open, with several items removed and used. Personal items arranged with a care that was unmistakably deliberate, the care of people who had organized their space and settled in to wait. At the far end of the chamber, past the sleeping bags, a secondary passage branched off to the north. Its entrance was blocked, completely blocked, by a collapse of basalt and packed volcanic debris that began approximately 12 feet into the passage and rose from floor to ceiling. The collapse showed no signs of disturbance from the chamber side. They had gone deeper into the cave, and a section of tunnel had come down behind them. The rockfall dated, based on geological analysis conducted over the following weeks, to between 1985 and 1992, fully consistent with August 1988. Court documents and the subsequent geological report confirmed that the collapse zone corresponded to a weakened section of the tube ceiling that the 1986 survey had identified as structurally at risk. The same survey whose findings had been flagged in the database that the Forest Service Permit Office had never consulted. Webb's team documented everything before anything was moved. It took 3 days of careful survey work. Among the personal items in the chamber were Amy Drescher's nature journal, pressed flowers still in place between its pages, the last entry dated August 20th, 1988, the Saturday of the trip, describing a hawk she had seen above the meadow. Tom Holt's biology field notebook, Patrice Holt's nursing bag, its contents inventoried, and, in a side pocket of David Drescher's backpack, a small spiral notebook filled with his handwriting, daily notes, observations, practical information, and at the back, a list of names. All 12 of them, each one with a small mark beside it. Webb called the Benton County Sheriff's Office from outside the cave entrance on the afternoon of April 16, 2022. He sat on a rock in the April light and looked at the drainage below him and at the old growth above him and at the line of mountains to the east, and he made the call. His voice, by all accounts of those who received it, was steady throughout. The recovery operation took 11 weeks, conducted jointly by the Benton County Sheriff's Office, the Oregon State Police, and the USCs. The families were notified before the public announcement, individually, by a victim's advocate who traveled to each home. The notifications were made over 2 days in late April of 2022. Janet Okafor was 51 years old. Paul was 49. They were notified together at Janet's home in Corvallis. The advocate told them what had been found, what the geological assessment had confirmed, and what it meant. Janet sat for a long time without speaking. Then she asked whether Amy Drescher's journal had been found, because she had known Amy, had been fond of her, had thought about her for 34 years. The advocate told her it had. Janet nodded. She looked at the window. She said that was good, that Amy would have wanted it found. The geological failure that had led to the deaths of 12 people in August of 1988 was the subject of a formal review by the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries and the U.S. Forest Service in 2022 and 2023. The review confirmed that the 1986 hazard flag had been present in the Dogami database, had been transmitted to the District Forest Service office, and had not been integrated into the permit issuance system used by that office. The gap between the two systems was not unique to this district. It existed in 18 other district offices across Oregon. A federal remediation order issued in 2023 required full database integration across all affected districts within 18 months. The order was designated the Drescher-Holt Protocol within the Forest Service's internal documentation system. It is expected to affect permit processing for an estimated 460 restricted geological zones across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. There were no criminal charges. The failure had been systemic and bureaucratic rather than individual. Several officials who had been involved in the 1988 permit process were no longer living. The review board's final report stated plainly that 12 people had died because 2 databases had never talked to each other, and that this was a failure of systems rather than of any single person's malice, and that this distinction, while legally significant, did not reduce the weight of what had been lost. At the public memorial service held in Corvallis in September of 2022, at the Corvallis Community Church, in the same building where the August group had met for 34 years, Vera Drescher was seated in the front row. She was 94 years old. She had outlived her grandson by 34 years and had never stopped believing she would eventually know what had happened to him. She was holding something in her lap. When the service ended and people came to speak to her, She showed it to those who asked, a postcard, still in its original envelope, still bearing the stamp David had put on it himself. Postmarked Eugene, Oregon, September 6, 1988. Sent by her own hand, addressed to herself, from her grandson. She had kept it for 34 years. David Drescher was 26 years old on the morning he drove 12 people into the hills east of Corvallis, with 2 months of planning behind him and a postcard already written on his kitchen counter. He was the kind of person who sent postcards because he understood that paying attention to people was itself a form of love. And he paid attention carefully and consistently. And he had organized a camping trip for 12 young people because he believed that taking them somewhere beautiful would show them something about the world they could not learn in a church basement. He was right about that. He could not have known what the mountain was keeping. Amy Drescher pressed a sprig of fennel into her journal on the morning she left. She set her library book on a flat rock by the creek and went to look at something and intended to come back for it. The hawk she sketched on August 20th, the last page of her journal, was a red-tailed hawk, drawn in pencil with careful attention to the angle of the wings. She was 14. She deserved every year after that one. Tom and Patrice Holt never opened the Martinellis. The bottle was found in the cooler in their vehicle at the Mary's Peak trailhead when the search ended, still sealed. Its gold foil still bright, which is the particular stubbornness of things that were made for a celebration that never came. Janet Okafor went to the Corvallis Community Church parking lot on August 19, 2022. She brought her candle as she always had. This time, Paul was there, and several members of the August group, and a few people from the church who had heard that Janet came every year and had finally decided to come too. She lit the candle. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said that she had kept coming because she had not known what else to do, and that not knowing what else to do was sometimes the same thing as doing the right thing. What the cave gave back was not justice in the way that an arrest gives justice. It was something different, a truth that had been sealed in the dark for 34 years, and that, when it finally came into the light, answered every question that the families had carried. Not all truths arrive with a conviction. Some arrive with a geological report and a survey team and a geologist who grew up in Corvallis and who descended into a mountain on a spring morning carrying, without fully knowing it, the weight of a town's 34-year question. The mountain had kept them safe, in its way from the elements. It had kept them together. It had kept Amy's journal and David's notebook and the careful arrangement of the things they had organized while they waited. That is not the ending anyone would have chosen. But it is the truth. And the truth, however late and however hard, is the only thing that finally lets the people who are left begin. When you think about Janet Okafor lighting a candle in that parking lot every August 19th for 32 years, before she knew anything, before there was any reason to believe an answer was coming, what does that kind of faithfulness mean to you? The gap between two databases, a hazard flag in one system, a permit issued from another, cost 12 lives and 34 years of not knowing. Does that feel like an accident or a failure that demands a different kind of accountability? And for those of you who have followed cases where the answer was never a crime, but a system that simply didn't work, is that harder to accept, or in some ways, easier? Leave your thoughts below. We read all of them, every time. Justice and truth, which is its own kind of justice, found those 12 people after 34 years. Stories like theirs are why this channel exists. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe. More cases are in the description below, and every one of them belongs to someone who deserved better. Thank you for watching.